Okay, hello everybody. It's 7 p.m. and our webinar is beginning. Trudeau's failed coup panelists, please switch on your cameras. Welcome to everyone at home. Amazing to see so many people here. There's already 165 people live on the Zoom call. That's incredible. So looking forward to tonight's event. Hello, I'm here with Carlos Ron, Maria Victor, and Vijay Prashad. We're live on Zoom. We're also live on the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute's Facebook page. That's facebook.com/Canada Policy. So if you've got any friends that you think might want to watch this on Facebook, you can post that there. You can also find lots of links on our Twitter. Just look for Canadian Foreign Policy Institute. And yeah, you can also hear more about the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute at foreignpolicy.ca. So I see lots of people are still joining, lots of attendance. Hi, Ken. Hi, Alexandra. Hi, Emrate. Hi, Arnold. Great to see you all. Hi, Barbara. Welcome. You can also let us know what traditional territories you're on. We always love to hear from people at home. So good evening again, everyone. A big welcome to our panelists and to all of you at home for joining us. So excited to be here. We're here with Vijay Prashad, Carlos Ron, Maria Victor for our event, Trudeau's Failed Coup. So my name is Bianca Mugyenyi with the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute. And we want to begin by just really thanking our sponsors for today. Canadian Dimension is our media sponsor. We'd also like to thank the many groups that endorsed and supported our event and helped us with outreach: Common Frontiers, the Canadian Latin America Alliance, Canadian Campaign of Venezuelans and Friends Against Sanctions, Regina Peace Council, the Ottawa Peace Council, Frente Hugo Chavez para la Defensa de los Pueblos in Vancouver, the Anti-Imperialist Alliance, Fire This Time, Movement for Social Justice, Socialist Action, the Movement Against War and Occupation, the Hamilton Coalition to Stop the War, and the Louis Riel Bolivarian Circle. Thank you. I also want to acknowledge that I'm hosting this event in Montreal, or Tiohtià:ke, which is on the territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka people and the keepers of the Eastern Door of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Like I said, it's amazing to see so many of you here, still more participants coming on. There's now about 209 of us on the call, which is very exciting. As always, we love to hear from you at home. The chat is open. Please, of course, keep your comments cordial, civil, free from any racist or sexist commentary. So again, my name is Bianca Mugyenyi. I'm here representing the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, which is an organization that seeks to bridge the gap between the reality and perception of Canada's role in the world. And we also work to oppose the racism that is embedded in our foreign policy. And again, you can find out more at foreignpolicy.ca. Our organization is reliant on our community to keep going, to keep doing this work. So please do consider donating or becoming a sustainer at foreignpolicy.ca/donation. So, and now for tonight's event, I am thrilled to be here with our esteemed speakers. And just a little bit before we get started, I want you all to know that you can ask questions towards the end. Just make sure to put your questions in the Q&A box. We'll be hearing from our speakers, and then we'll open it up to our audience so that you can participate. And so for tonight's event, I'll start with a little bit of an introduction, which starts 3 years ago. 3 years ago today, a little known Venezuelan politician declared himself president during an outdoor rally in Caracas. Canada recognized this politician, Juan Guaidó, that same day. And according to the Canadian press, Canadian diplomats spent months coordinating the plan that led to Guaido declaring himself president of Venezuela. At that time, he was the new head of the opposition-dominated National Assembly. A Canadian diplomat informed the Canadian press that they helped Guaido facilitate conversations with people that were outside of the country, and inside of the country. And I quote, The Globe and Mail reported that then Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland, open quote, spoke to Juan Guaidó to congratulate him on unifying opposition forces in Venezuela just 2 weeks before he declared himself interim president. Further setting up the stage for Guaido's self-declaration, Canada launched the Lima Group in 2017, imposed sanctions, and brought Venezuelan officials to the International Criminal Court, the ICC. But 3 years later, the coup has failed. So on this anniversary of Guaido's bid for power, it's worth asking, how long is the Canadian government going to continue this charade? Is it another year? Is it 5 years? Or will they just wait until Washington changes its position? At the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, we don't want this remarkable event in Canadian foreign policy history to be forgotten. And even more important, it needs to be reversed. So today we launched a public letter signed by David Suzuki, rock legend Roger Waters, as well as 2 sitting MPs, a member of Quebec legislature, 4 former MPs, authors like Linda McQuaig, Chris Hedges, Tariq Ali, Judy Rebick, and many other prominent artists, authors, and academics calling on Canada to end support for Guaido and to normalize relations with Venezuela. So you can check that out. I'll post that in the chat in just a second. You can also find it on our site. But please do take action. Please send an email to Foreign Minister Joly in support of today's open letter, calling on Canada to remove the sanctions, drop the Lima Group, stop recognizing Guaido. And so on that note, I have the terrific pleasure of introducing our first speaker of the evening. Maria Paez Victor is a sociologist born in Caracas, Venezuela. She has a PhD from York University and many years of national and international experience in policy analysis and environmental assessment. She's a founding member of the think tank Canadian, Latin American, and Caribbean Policy Center, as well as the Louis Riel Bolivarian Circle. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bianca. Thank you for inviting me to be on this panel with 2 people that I admire so much, Minister Carlos Rong and Vijay Prashad, whom I always read whatever he writes. Well, let's start. Suppose the Prime Minister of Canada called on President Biden to resign because his election was not democratic enough and created a group of Ottawa with Haiti, Guatemala, Colombia, Brazil, and Panama to recognize Trump and overturn the Biden regime. And he insisted to the world that Trump was the real president of the USA, and then publicly called on the United States Armed Forces to depose Biden and back Trump. Well, not likely, of course. Why? Because the United States is more powerful than Canada. But Canada has done all this and more against Venezuela, violating every single indispensable principle of international law, diplomacy, and quite frankly, good sense. Yves Engler, a most insightful international expert that most of you know, states clearly that Canada's actions internationally are based first on its support for empire, first the British and now the United States, second, its support on corporate interest. Now, lamentably, it is increasingly linked to US corporate interest. And the more impoverished a nation, says Engler, the greater Ottawa's ability to distort its activities. And the Canadian government has spewed a torrent of lies against Venezuela. Now, first a caveat. I am as certain as anyone can be that the vast majority of good people of Canada have no idea what their government does internationally, specifically what it is doing to Venezuela. Ottawa is not known for its openness to public scrutiny, despite freedom of information legislation. In practice, it is hard to find out what goes on. For example, the NGO News Media Canada has been very concerned since 1997 of the government restrictions to information, despite legal guarantees of access. Especially secretive is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is run like a fiefdom. It has little or no public participation and little overseen by a lame parliamentary committee more likely to rubber stamp anything the minister wants. At election time, Hardly any questions are put to the candidates about international issues, except those that pertain to the economic links to the USA. So the Canadian citizens are not well served and hardly know what the government is doing to Venezuela, except for the bits that, as a friend of mine calls it, the stenographer press publishes. If they knew what was happening, they would repudiate what Ottawa is doing to Venezuela. And unfortunately, even the main political parties in Canada all support Ottawa's foreign policy towards Venezuela. Ottawa was quick to recognize the puppet Guaido, as Bianca was just saying, an obscure assembly deputy, hardly known inside the country with no election whatsoever, who was only known, by the way, because he pulled his pants down and mooned people in a protest. That was what he was known for. It was a total fiction, backed only by the cupidity, the racism, and the money and malice of the United States, Canada, and the European countries. Ottawa has even invited the most anti-democratic and violent Venezuelan opposition leaders to go to Ottawa and meet with Trudeau, and funded them also, while giving no attention to the moderate opposition leaders. Ottawa uses weasel words to disguise its aggression towards Venezuela, using platitudes like defending democracy, alleging humanitarian crises that calls for intervention, and the authoritarian Maduro, all the while demanding Venezuela disown its own constitutional laws and its people's electoral votes. In short, expecting Canadian and US tutelage, as if Venezuela had no sovereignty. Ottawa created the infamous Group of Lima, specifically to overthrow the Venezuelan government, as Bianca just mentioned. These were the most corrupt, anti-democratic, right-wing governments of the region at that time. This is perhaps the most despicable and embarrassing policy of the most fanatical Cold War obsessed member of the Trudeau government, which is Chrystia Freeland. What the United States want is, one, to regain control of Venezuelan oil, the largest reserve of oil on the planet, and two, to punish Venezuelan disobedience to Washington, not only for its attempt to build socialism, but also, closer to home, to squash real participatory democracy. Canada, the mining capital of the world, in turn, seeks to control Venezuela's enormous gold mines and other precious minerals. The powerful lobby of the mining and petroleum corporations have free access to the corridors of power in Ottawa. I can't tell you how much I've tried to have a meeting with Trudeau and not been able to do it, even though I'm a citizen. But both the US and Canada have notoriously failed. They have not overthrown the government of Nicolás Maduro. The illegal sanctions have been counterproductive. They have rallied the population to defend itself and its government from this foreign attack, and repudiated opposition leaders who have traitorously called for these sanctions and military invasion. The Group of Lima has been disintegrating. It doesn't even have Lima anymore, as countries have elected new progressive governments and have left it: Mexico, Argentina, Bolivia, Peru, Santa Lucia. The new president of Peru has said that forming this group has been the most disastrous foreign policy in Peru's history. But the Canadian media says nothing about this tremendous failure of the Trudeau government. The Canadian government has lost claims it may have had of its humanity. It did not express condemnation or even concern as Venezuela was assaulted with economic blockade, attacks on its currency, coup d'etat attempts, cyber attacks, drone attacks, infrastructure sabotage, assassinations, attempts on the life of President Maduro with drones, fake humanitarian invasion, paramilitary invasions, attacks by mercenaries and criminal gangs. They've even kidnapped a diplomat, Alex Saab, and a vile media campaign of defamation against its president. Venezuela has been blocked from buying food and medicine internationally. Its assets in foreign banks have been stolen. Venezuela all of a sudden became a piñata. along with its US Petroleum Company and its 13 tons of gold in the Bank of England, they've all been robbed. This has been a scandalous robbery of a country like no other, estimated about 200 billion. The economic blockade is like a medieval siege aimed at starving a people in order to get their surrender. Renowned US investigators Mark Weisbrot and Jeremy Sachs estimated that in 2017 and 18 alone, 40,000 Venezuelans died directly due to the sanctions preventing the buying of medicine. And the UN Rapporteur on Human Rights, Dr. Desayas, has calculated that up to now, 100,000 Venezuelans have died directly due to these so-called sanctions that prevent medicines reaching the country. Even during a devastating world pandemic, the US tried to block vaccines from reaching Venezuela with Canada's acquiescence. The sad truth is that Canada has linked its defense, its economy, and its foreign policy with those of the United States. By throwing its hat into the neo-colonial and imperialist ring of the United States, Canada has placed itself on the wrong side of history. So what is left of Canadian sovereignty? Well, it may still have the Queen and a parliamentary system, but the power of the United States corporations have become dominant in the Canadian economy, and it grows more and more dependent of that of the United States. And they're trying to debilitate the role of the state, noticeably in eroding Canada's most admired healthcare system. The power of the Washington State Department has all but overshadowed the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which is run by people who are educated, read, indoctrinated in the United States. The harm to Canada's international standing is immense. There was a time when there was a Canadian in almost every international committee or other. This is the greatest indication of the erosion of Canada's reputation, that twice Canada failed to get a place in the UN Security Council. Why? Because a vote for Canada was seen as a vote for the USA. Canadian politicians drone on and on about this being a country that respects the rule of law. And that is a fiction, because it does not respect international law. The bedrock of international law are the UN Charter, the International Criminal Court, and the Geneva Convention. And Canada has violated them all. For example, when it overthrew the governments of Haiti and Honduras, when it bombed Libya and Syria, and as it continues to violate them by engaging in the criminal economic blockade against Venezuela. Someday, Canadian politicians may be brought to the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity for those 100,000 Venezuelans that have died. And elevating itself as some sort of democracy judge, the Trudeau government insists that Venezuela's government is not democratic enough, and even has outrageously called upon the Venezuelan armed forces to depose Nicolas Maduro and install Guaido, to the point that the recent elections on the 21st of November, witnessed by over 300 or more international observers, in which opposition parties fully participated and won significant positions, is still not good enough for Canada. The same Canada that denied Venezuelans living in Canada the right to vote in the last presidential elections at their consulates here. The same Canada that, not having any sort of proportional representation, consistently gets governments elected that do not reflect the will of its citizens. The same Canada that has a deplorable record of abuse and neglect of the human rights of its Indigenous peoples. The same Canada that fully supports murderous regimes around the world with appalling human rights abuses, such as Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and Colombia. What would I recommend to the Canadian government? Well, I recommend the following: to take a good look at the US hybrid law against war against Venezuela and prepare for its eventuality in its soil. Because, as the celebrated US Secretary of State John Foster Dulles said a long time ago, the United States does not have friends, only interest. Canada's significant dependence on the US economy is an obvious security problem, and an economic war would entail suppression of supply lines and scarcity, which we have seen during the pandemic. Remember, face masks and vaccines that we couldn't get? War against the Canadian dollar is possible by manipulating the currency ratings, just as the US has all but destroyed the Bolivar. And how can a Canadian military closely embedded with the United States military protect its enormous southern border with the towns and cities along it? If civil war breaks out in the United States, and as many serious historians are now considering, how will Canada cope with the illegal US citizens arriving? Or when catastrophic climate change induces massive migration as climate refugees from the United States try to get to Canada, how can a Canadian military defend Canada? Sir John A. Macdonald, Canada's first prime minister, knew a century ago that the only real threat to Canada was from the South, from the USA, not across the Atlantic. The signs are all there of the moral rot and the dwindling status of the USA, the crumbling trust in US democratic institutions, the unsustainable military budgets, the endemic unemployment and underemployment, the crumbling infrastructure, undeniable political polarization, horrifying internal violence, increasing poverty, ubiquitous racism and inequality, and proliferating fascist movements in the USA. A wounded superpower is bound to try to assert itself by what it has left, its formidable military power, which will impose a militarized capitalism, as that extraordinary intellectual Chris Hedges states. The USA will look to the hugely resource-rich Canada as its front yard. It will want its fresh water, fish, and lumber, fertile prairies, mining and oil, and especially as the planet slides towards climate change catastrophes. The Venezuelan people have been backed in their struggles for sovereignty by the sterling international solidarity of many nations, especially Cuba, Russia, China, Iran, Turkey, and as well, the majority of the non-aligned countries in the United Nations. Venezuela has been a strong defender of the Charter of the United Nations and international law, whereas Canada has undermined the United Nations and the International Criminal Court. It has openly conspired against legitimate governments and has backed murderous right-wing extremist regional leaders in Colombia, Bolivia, Peru, Brazil. In the end, what the capitalist nations really want today is to undermine participatory democracy and promote corporate totalitarianism. I contend that it is not only Venezuela's unfinished socialism that capitalists are afraid of, but its flourishing, communal, rich, participatory democracy. It is a sad situation of lost opportunities for friendship between these two countries, Canada and Venezuela. Both countries were historically colonized. Both know about the economic pressures from the USA. Both have democratic institutions. Both have substantial indigenous population. You would expect some greater understanding and cooperation between these two, but goodwill was needed. And unfortunately, that is what Canada is lacking. However, to end, Venezuela is coming out of this dark tunnel of hybrid war, a stronger nation in terms of its social cohesion, its solid international partners, a greater economic diversification and food production, by beating the sanctions with a positive trend towards economic growth, beating hyperinflation and increasing oil production, with a thriving democracy as proven by 22 elections, by its triumph over the anti-democratic US-backed opposition and the puppet pretender Guaido, by its lively and vital network of social and communal organizations. These are the backbone of the social transformation that is the Bolivarian Revolution, that above all stands for the Venezuelan sovereignty based on the will of its people. So I end up by saying, I am not worried. Venezuela will prevail. venceremos. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Maria. Thank you for that passionate presentation and just such a broad overview as well, detailing how Canada is really at the center of this campaign to undermine Venezuela, to overthrow Venezuela's government, for also underlining the motivations and the lack of an independent foreign policy on the part of Canada. And on the subject of media that you raised earlier on in your presentation, we have struggled to get this open letter that we're asking everybody to sign on to be covered by the corporate press, despite these incredible signatories and just the remarkable nature of the events. So there are some very serious challenges. I look so forward to hearing more from you, Maria, in the Q&A. I want to remind folks at home to take action, email our foreign minister, Melanie Joly, and ask her to normalize relations with Venezuela, drop the Lima Group, drop Gwydo, and end sanctions. So the next speaker of the evening is Carlos Ron. Carlos Ron is Venezuela's Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs for North America and President of the Simone Bolivar Institute for Peace and Solidarity Among Peoples. He's joining us live from Caracas. Welcome, Carlos.
Well, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Bianca. And of course, it's a wonderful pleasure to join this wonderful panel with my comrade and brother, Vijay Prashad, and of course, Maria, who now gives me the very, very difficult task of speaking after that great and passionate intervention. But let me start by saying something that I think is important for Venezuelans on a day like today. 64 years ago, on a day just like today.
You're muted.
Oh, Carlos, you're muted, and Maria,
Sorry.
You need to mute.
Sorry. So I was saying, on a day like today, 64 years ago, my grandfather was coming back home after he had been missing for about 3 or 4 days, and my family was getting worried and concerned of his whereabouts, because by early in the morning, the news had come out that Marcos Pérez Jiménez, who was the dictator at the time, had fled the country after an unpopular uprising in the streets. As a matter of fact, my grandfather had been missing because he had been part of the clandestine movement that helped overthrow Pérez Jiménez. And he came home not alone. He came home with several of the political prisoners that were at the time imprisoned and being tortured because they wanted to promote and fight for democracy. And I say this because this is where we come from. This is the beginning. This is where this political process in Venezuela, this revolution comes from. It comes from the struggles, the popular struggles that Venezuela has been fighting throughout the 20th century and continues to fight today to make sure that democracy will be achieved 64 years ago, with people like my grandfather, with people like in the social democratic parties, in the communist parties, and some very honest and courageous people in the military. Well, that democracy was respected throughout all these years and was continued and was deepened, as we believe it is deepened today. That's why to all Venezuelans, it should be an insult that a man 3 years ago on a day like today decided to stand in a public square and with no mandate, with no election, with nothing but the support of John Bolton and his friends, decide to claim that he is president. And if it was just that, maybe we could overlook the gravity of the seriousness of the issue, but it's even worse because what Guaido stands for and what that interim government, as they call it, stands for is really a scam, a major scam that has been in place for the last 3 years, robbing Venezuela the Venezuelan people's assets and funds from accounts around the world, preventing Venezuelans, for example, of having the necessary funds to combat the pandemic when it was needed. If it had not been for Guaido, we could have had all our vaccines, all the population vaccinated, back in earlier last year. Now it took us so long to achieve that. Fortunately, we have done it because there is something in the world that is called solidarity, and that we can count always on our friends from Cuba, China, Russia, and many other countries that helped Venezuela during this terrible situation. But it's this claim, this idea that this man is somehow another president, or is a legitimate government, and that countries such as Canada have backed this idea, that has put Venezuela, the lives of Venezuelan citizens, at a great risk. So this is something that I think is important for our audience in Canada to know and to understand, that supporting Guaido is not just having favoring another side or favoring a political position. No, this is actually backing a criminal organization that is attempting against the rights and the well-being of the Venezuelan people. So I think this is important to know. I wanted to just briefly talk a little bit about the the idea of our relations with Canada and where they stand now, because I think this is the worst moment in bilateral relations since 1948, when we started formally having relations between the two countries. Since 1999, when the Bolivarian revolution started, of course, there's always been tensions, as we can expect, as two political projects that differ started to part ways. But it has been after 2016 under Trudeau that really we see that the change and a more aggressive attitude of Canada, where Canada has begun to play a role in basically doing what the United States doesn't feel comfortable doing, or doesn't want to do in front of cameras. And basically, and we can tell, the switch really happened after the Trump administration came to power in the United States, because in 2016, we held about 9 high-level meetings between officials from both our countries. Since then, there haven't been no real high-level meetings between our countries, despite the fact that I myself, as Vice Minister for North America, have requested officially meetings. These requests have been ignored. So have several requests from our embassy in Ottawa. And since 2017, sanctions, or what they say are sanctions, but are really unilateral coercive measures issued by Canada, have begun to be also put in place. As a matter of fact, it's interesting that Canada had to undergo a process of creating an association with the United States in order to justify or sort of place the sanctions on Venezuela. So far, 113 Venezuelan officials or people related to the Venezuelan government have been sanctioned, but we understand that these are not people that are targeted themselves, but that just targeting these offices or these functions that they hold is in itself an attack on Venezuela's foreign relations. We've had people sanctioned that it makes no sense. You have electoral authority, so people that run elections get sanctioned. People that conduct diplomacy, like our previous Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza, was sanctioned. People, Olympic athletes that wanted to compete in several events that took place in Canada were denied visas because of their relation to the Venezuelan government. This is an attack, basically, on Venezuela, and goes beyond just the person itself, the personality in question. Like Maria very well explained, as soon as, and so Bianca, as soon as Guaido proclaimed himself president, Freeland recognized him as such. A month later, he was here there in Ottawa with Trudeau, and they have gotten special material and political support all throughout. You have to know, people in Canada must know that Canadian embassies, Canadian diplomatic buildings have been used in order to carry out events promoting Guaido's groups and Guaido's representatives abroad. This was the case, I know particularly that took place in Brazil, but I know also took place in several countries in the Caribbean. And other people related to the Canadian government has also given support to Guaido. There's Alan Cohen, who's a diplomat, also put all his special services, network of contacts to advocate for the support of Guaido. It is important also to think that the seriousness of Canada's policy is that basically it's trying to put a multilateral cover to the illegal practices of the United States. This is not a practice this is not a policy, I should say, that comes out from Canada, but rather it's a copy of the policy that's promoted by the United States, but it just grants it a multilateral cover. So that's why it is Canada that spearheads the Lima Group and not the United States. And they create this group, which is illegal by all means, according to international law, but it gives the appearance that there's some sort of multilateral organization backing the hard line against Venezuela, which in reality this is not the case. And so Canada is playing for this script, is lending its support to this. It is also lending support to these international donors conferences, which is something that we should really take a good look at, because these are conferences where basically you have a group of people denouncing Venezuela, you have very harsh critics of Venezuela, but you have also people that are benefiting of making this recent migration of Venezuelans throughout the region something something they can benefit from. And these are countries that are asking for funds through, whether it be to the UN, whether it be to the United States, in order to supposedly help Venezuelans. But when we talk to Venezuelan migrants, many of whom have decided to come back to Venezuela, many of whom we as a government helped come back to Venezuela, nobody knows where these funds are going to. Nobody's seen any of these benefits. What you see is this group, this criminal gang of people led by Guaido, using money that has been somehow whether gathered by these donors or who knows from where, and they've been putting this to use. This is a corruption scheme that is very sad to see, and is very outrageous in the face of the hardships that many of our fellow Venezuelans are facing throughout the region. Of course, there's important interest behind Canada's policy, and we can only think that besides the issue of complying with the U.S. logic and U.S. plan towards the rest of the region, there's of course mining interests that people that want to go into the mining business in Venezuela and want new opportunities. There's companies like Crystal X who wants to get their hands on Citgo, and there's a trial. And by the way, just to show you how criminal this group of people that Guaido represents are, is that the man who advised Crystal X on how to design their case against Citgo against Venezuela in order to take a hold of Citgo ends up later on being Guaido's attorney general in this fake government. So imagine the contradiction and the conflict of interest that you have, and that is so outrageous in this case. Of course, after the U.S. sanctions became sanctioned the Venezuelan oil imports to the United States, the heavy crude that Venezuela used to provide for refineries in the United States, well, that got replaced. About a third of that got replaced with oil that is coming down from Alberta, which is almost the same type of heavy crude as the one in Venezuela. So we could, of course, understand how there is some special interest behind Canada maintaining this policy of aggression towards Venezuela. Like I said, diplomatic relations are strained. The embassy of Canada in Caracas has been technically closed since July of 2019. We're still open in Ottawa, but we're still waiting for the requests that we have made for renewal of our diplomatic visas, and which have been ignored and have been running for over a year now. We had to temporarily close our consulates in Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal in June of 2019, partly because of Canada's inability of finding ways for us to comply with the Vienna Convention and be able to sustain our consulates there. And as of like I said, and another thing that's very vicious in this relationship is that Canada has recognized Guaido's representative as ambassador to Canada, and maintains this relationship with this man, who is another one of the persons that is also benefiting from the funds that that previously used to be used in Citgo to finance social programs, and now they're being used to finance so-called NGOs who are making also lucrative activities out of this current situation. Again, this is like I said, you must understand how criminal this group is, how seriously this scam that is the so-called interim government. It's a scam where about some opposition analysts have said that about 1,600 to 2,000 people are living off of it. And it's not just politicians, and it's not just Guaido staff. It's journalists, it's political analysts, influencers, people that are related to this idea of maintaining this idea of the interim government, and which got $153 million as part of the budget for their activities last year. So you imagine these are people that are profiting from maintaining the situation, while Venezuela is seriously lacking funds that could definitely be put to use here. If you want to understand how little importance and how little relevance this group has in Venezuela, you can just see the past election that just took place this month in the state of Barinas, where you had an opposition candidate win as governor, and there was he was in an interview with a Venezuelan journalist who set up a hypothetical question and said, if you had two phone lines ringing at the same time, and one was Guaido and one was Maduro, who do you pick up? Who do you talk to? And he said, well, I have to be honest, I'll pick up the call from Maduro, because he's the real president. He's the president that's really in charge. And this is somebody that is supposed to be part of the opposition that backs Guaido. But the reality is that this is a fiction that has been set out to sustain this farce, to sustain this propaganda against Venezuela, and who we think Canada should really stop, recognize, and move forward, and go back to diplomacy, and go back to a relationship of respect with Venezuela. And I want to end just by saying this. I, as Vice Minister, who have this responsibility towards Canada, we wish that we would have a relationship. We know we're going to have a relationship that is going to have its differences, that is going to have we come from very different political backgrounds, we come from very different political objectives, but we believe in diplomacy in Venezuela. And what we've always wanted to do is establish relations that are healthy, based on diplomacy and based on mutual respect. We do this not because, or I should say, we do this because it's in the in the well-being of our peoples, both our people in Canada and both our people in Venezuela. We have hundreds or thousands, I should say, of Venezuelan people in Canada who are not being taken care of by properly by Venezuelan by the Venezuelan Foreign Service, because we can't have renewals on our visas, and because we can have our functioning the way it should be. So what we really want to do is reestablish a civility so that we can really help and serve our Venezuelan citizens, and we can provide that same service to Canadian citizens. And because we know politically we're going to be very distant, miles away, but we have to go back to rationality. And Canada cannot have a policy of recognizing something that really doesn't exist. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you for that call for a return to diplomacy and respect. And it was really great to get all of those updates, the important updates about the state of relations. It's terrible to hear about the embassy closures. Thanks also for outlining just the devastating impact of Canada's policies and sanctions on the lives of Venezuelans. And for, for sort of giving us more insight into what Canada's support for Gwydo really means, and a deeper understanding of, as you say, this fiction or scam. So I'm looking very forward to hearing from you as well in the Q&A. Thank you so much. Our next speaker of the evening is Vijay Prashad. Vijay Prashad is a renowned historian and journalist. He's the director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, which is a movement-driven research institution based in Argentina, Brazil, India, and South Africa. He's also chief editor of LeftWord Books. He's written 25 books, and for 25 years was a professor at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. Welcome, Vijay.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And thanks to the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute and to you, Bianca, for inviting me. Thanks a lot for having Maria and Carlos go before me, because they laid out the issues so well. I can now just be flippant and perhaps a little annoying. When George W. Bush was the president, you might remember that people in the United States says it's time to drive to Canada. I don't know if you remember that. Let's go to Canada. Well, at the time I was, reporting a story in Papua New Guinea where there was a mine owned by a Canadian company. I'll come back to that company, and I'm going to in fact end with that company. I got an email from them just about this week. And the things I was seeing this Canadian company do in Papua New Guinea, I thought, wow, it's so substantial and so important to recognize the immense branding exercise that Canada is. Canada isn't a country. Canada is a brand. It's been able to establish itself as a brand of democracy and human rights and decency and decent healthcare and so on. It's not actually a country. It shouldn't be a member state in the United Nations. It should just be a brand, a full-page advertisement in an airline first-class lounge. That's about all that Canada is. Sorry, guys. I know that most of you here are Canadian nationals and so on, but I just want to say that that's what it sometimes feels like. And it's not any better, obviously, in the United States. Okay, on the 19th of January, this was hilarious, friends. 19th of January, President Joe Biden gives a press conference. In the press conference, he's asked about US relations with Latin America and the Caribbean. This is what he says, okay? I'm not quoting from him because this doesn't need a quotation. This is what he says. He says, Latin America and the Caribbean is not the backyard of the United States, because that would be offensive. Harkens to the Monroe Doctrine of 1823. It's not the backyard. Don't worry. I'm a liberal. I'm not like Trump, the conservative. Conservatives may say it's the backyard of the United States. Don't worry. Love me. I'm a liberal, because it's not the backyard. Get ready for this. It's not the backyard, he said. It's our front yard. It's our front yard. It's our front yard. That means the United States doesn't cede sovereignty, doesn't say the Monroe Doctrine out of date. No. It's not the backyard, it's the front yard, but it's still our yard. It's still our yard. That's the important point that Biden made. Shocking statement. should have elicited criticism in the editorial page of the New York Times, should have elicited criticism, in the Washington Post and so on. Liberal writers coming in to say, good God, we can't talk about yard in this way, front yard, backyard. What about that they have their own property down the street in a nice little American cul-de-sac, etc.? Nobody said a thing. It's totally acceptable to think of Latin America and the Caribbean as the bailiwick, as the little, yard of the United States and its brand Canada. That's perfectly acceptable, friends. Doesn't elicit even raised eyebrows. And I didn't see too many memes online on this, although there should have been many. Juan Guaido. Look, let's face it. There is something cartoonish about the manufacturing of Juan Guaido. Juan Guaido was not manufactured by the Peruvian government, okay? There's no such thing called the Lima Group. We know it's the Ottawa Group. It's not the Lima Group. The Peruvians didn't push this. The Canadians pushed this. The United States was too scared to call it the Washington Group. So they told the Canadians, you better go and handle this. Justin Trudeau, you know how he is. He is the ace poodle. He's the guy who takes over from Tony Blair. Whatever Tony Blair did for George W. Bush, Justin Trudeau will do for any American president. Face it, those mild criticisms that he had with Trump, mild in comparison to what he might have said, even as a Canadian, premier, very mild criticisms. Anyway, Justin Trudeau went running off to the Peruvians and said, look, it would look bad if it were called the Ottawa Group. It would look bad. Can you please call it the Lima Group? So in 2017, they have the meeting in Lima. So this absurd thing called the Lima Group, which violates the UN Charter, which violates the OAS Charter. It's actually an illegal conspiracy against a country that's a member nation of the United Nations, the country being Venezuela. This illegal conspiracy was then, charged to produce a fake person, a cartoonish character called Juan Guaido. But let's not push him aside and minimize his role at all. Because this is serious stuff. I mean, it's because they manufacture Juan Guaido that they're able to seize assets in the Bank of London, real money. It's because they manufactured Juan Guaido, they could create this confusion at the International Monetary Fund. I called the IMF and said, on your website, it says that Maduro is the president of Venezuela, and yet you are saying we can't deliver standard drawing rights to Venezuela because there's a dispute over the government. And the spokesperson said, well, we'll send over our statement. And within hours, it disappeared from the website that they had, in fact, recognized the UN recognized government in Venezuela. So that's the IMF. They can do this because Gwydo is actually this fictional character who's given the Bank of London, given the IMF, given the Swiss bank, recently Swiss bank, withheld funds to the vaccine alliance that Venezuela required because, again, there is this Juan Guaido fictional character that provides cover for them to seize funds of the Venezuelan government, of the Venezuelan people. Mr. Gwydo hasn't gone anywhere. He just announced that on the February the 14th, he wants to create more chaos in Venezuela. Well, create more chaos. The last couple of times Mr. Gwydo has tried to do things in Venezuela, not much has happened. But nonetheless, this is mischievous stuff. A country should not have to deal with this. The United States, Canada, and these other countries, Ivan Duque's Colombia and so on, are in an active conspiracy against a member nation of the United Nations. That's illegal. I mean, the people of Canada must stand up with one voice and say this has to end. This Gwydo charade has to end. This Ottawa Group nonsense has to end. And Canada needs to face up to a very particular issue, which I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about. And that is the extraordinarily dangerous role that Canadian mining companies play in the world. Now, at Tricontinental, we produced a text on the 10 most dangerous Canadian mining companies, and I can share that with you later. One of them is Barrick Gold. You might know, if you go to the University of Toronto, you might know that the School of International Relations is named the Peter Munk School. Munk was the head of Barrick Gold. It's a disgrace that an institution like the University of Toronto has a school named after him, and that too a School of International Relations. Just when Hugo Chavez won a mandate in his first election in 1998, came into office in 1999, just before the coup of 2002, pushed by the United States and the Canadians. Peter Monk writes in the Canadian press asking for the overthrow of Hugo Chavez. He called him authoritarian. You know, by the time Monk wrote that article in the Canadian press, Chavez had had more elections than any Canadian premier had ever had, I think. You know, there were, I think, 4 big national elections by the time Monk wrote that. He called Chavez then authoritarian. This nonsense about Maduro being authoritarian isn't something new. It's not about Maduro. It's about the fact that the Venezuelan government from the early days, the Bolivarian revolution, took a position against foreign mining companies. This is simply anathema to countries like the United States, Canada, and so on. Anathema. You are not allowed to put any kind of reins on their mining companies. You're not allowed to investigate them. That is simply not on. In fact, through this period, mining companies in Canada have pushed arbitration against Venezuela, against a range of countries around the world in the World Bank's settlement disputes mechanism. They continue to go and pressure these countries when these countries say, look, we signed an agreement, but we can't go through with it. Can we cancel it? No, you owe us 1.5 billion. You owe us 4 billion. And then they settle later, but for hundreds of millions of dollars, which these countries simply cannot afford. This is normal practice by Canadian mining companies, normal practice. Barrick Gold is interesting, but it's not the only one. You know, good people in Canada for a long time have fought to get the right to investigate Canadian mining companies. In fact, there was the attempt to create the Canadian Ombudsperson for Responsible Enterprise, CORE. This was put into place in a kind of, very light way, but they don't have the mechanism to compel documents or to compel people to testify. What's the point of creating an ombudsperson if they have no ability to compel people to testify? It's basically bogus. This is what Canada does. Canada creates a facade of democracy and human rights, but doesn't actually go and live by the axioms of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, by the various human rights measures that we have in the world. You simply don't have that. There was a study done in 2009 that found 171 high-profile incidents involving mining companies over the decade before that. So from whatever it is, 1999 to 2009. 34% of these incidents involved Canadian companies. Not one of them had been investigated. I just want to put this on the table for you, friends, because in your name, your Canadian companies are crushing people around the world, and you are not holding your own companies to account, let alone allowing international bodies to hold your companies to account. You're not allowing international bodies to hold them to account. You're not even holding them to account yourself. And Justin Trudeau said he was interested in this ombudsperson, this core position. Yes, he said that. But again, classically, let's have it, but let it do nothing. Let it not disturb the normal work of mining companies, which is to ruin the lives of people around the world. I said I was going to end with going back to Papua New Guinea. I got an email this week that somebody who had started working at that mine in 2005, Latte Lasso Poonam, age 49, from the Yanjakale village of Porgera in Papua New Guinea. He was crushed by a rock, pushed by the company Barrick Gold's machines. He was hospitalized, permanently lost his right leg. Just before he died, this is what he said. I want you to pay attention to what Latte Lasso Poonam, age 49, was crushed by Barrick Gold's machines. This is what he said. He said, "When will I be remedied by Barrick after having lived this abnormal life for so long?" After having lived this abnormal life for so long. What's the abnormal life? It's working for a Canadian company day in and day out, beaten by the thuggish security forces that operate there, who I have seen with my own eyes, brutal labor extraction techniques by a Canadian company. You will not allow your own companies to be monitored and investigated. Companies that commit actual tangible human rights violations, you will not allow that. and yet you will walk on the world stage and talk about human rights as if it doesn't bother you. Go and see the mess you have made yourself. Stop telling other people to clean up their own messes.
Thank you so much, Vijay, for that wonderful presentation, that very humorous presentation as well. It's so important for us, for our audience, to really understand the big picture. And you know, I thank you for illuminating how this failed bid also just fits into the struggle against imperialism that we see globally. And I'm so glad that you brought up Canadian mining and its atrocities. So for our audience, that concludes our presentations for the evening, and we're now going to move on to the Q&A portion of the event. We have a lot of questions that have been submitted. We don't have that much time, but we're going to try and get to as many as we can. Thank you again, panelists. I want to remind everyone at home to take action. The links are in the chat. And to find out about all of our brilliant speakers this evening and the work that they're doing. So the first question that we have, which I think I'll start with Carlos, but this question is for everyone, is what parallels can be drawn between the hybrid war against Venezuela today and the one against Chile in the early 1970s?
Oh, I think, you know, of course, perhaps it's a thing of sophistication. I think that now they have more tools at your disposal that you had back then to promote sort of multiple attacks at the same time, which is what really composes this hybrid war. But in truth, it's the same thing. I mean, what you're trying to do is undermine the will of the democratic will of the people who have decided to elect a government and who have decided to back a socialist orientation of that government, and then you're trying to, you know, asphyxiate with all the tools you have. The problem is that today, the United States is perhaps even more powerful than it was in 1973. I think the control that they have over the international financial system is even more complete than they did back then. You know, we've seen how, you know, simple transactions, bank transactions are blocked. There's an issue of overcompliance when we talk about the sanctions. That is also important, that people, out of fear of what may happen to them if they have a relationship with Venezuela, then they decide just to back out and not have any relationship whatsoever. And this was, for us, this was very clear, you know, right now during the pandemic, how you saw a lot of people that, a lot of companies that we were trying to buy medical supplies, you know, masks, like all these things that we've used for protection during the pandemic, and we couldn't go and obtain them directly from these companies because these companies were really afraid of, you know, selling to Venezuela because the U.S. might do something to them. Then when you actually found some companies that were willing to sell to you, they hike up the price 3 or 4 times because they know, you know, they have that advantage. But even then, when you try to pay through a bank transaction, you can't do it because the bank, you know, the SWIFT system is blocked, or, you know, the banks don't want to hold the money. We've had cases where we've made transactions and they've just gotten frozen in the middle of the, you know, the transaction itself. You know, the bank holds on to the money and says, okay, we can't deal with this, and we can't pay and we can't give it back. And that's how the theft of Venezuelan funds is being taken over. So I think it's, the comparison is of course is very legitimate. I think we see the same persecution of popular governments in this way. Perhaps, if anything, in the same way that the United States is stronger now and has a greater control over the financial system and other tools, I think Latin American progressive governments are also stronger now. I think we're not alone as alone as Allende was in '73, and we could see if you take a look at at the continent right now. There's a lot of hope because there's a lot of political forces to the left, and there's a lot of other tools that we have, like CELAC, like other integration processes that come from Latin America for Latin Americans, and that I think as well as the multipolarity that allowed us to have the solidarity of people like or governments like China and Russia, in the case of Venezuela, who were very helpful at the time of this blockade. So I think that's probably the difference, but it's still the hybrid words of then as the hybrid words of now are something that we must stand against and we must denounce every time we can.
Thank you, Carlos. Vijay?
Sorry. I think that there's immense sophistication in the media, way in which the media is operating. And we have a hard time denting that media narrative. I've been in the media business for a little over 30 years, and I know that it's really impossible to shake the very, very considerable octopus-like hold of the corporate capitalist media. They simply won't allow it, and they just accept what governments tell them. I mean, that's what's astounding. Not so astounding. It's a fact of who owns who owns these conduits of information. It's the mining companies and people like that who invest in financial instruments that then own the newspapers that simply don't want to take these governments to task or to raise questions. The isolation that they have tried to produce over Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, and so on is incredible. Let me just give you a quick example. The way in which the coup against Evo Morales was described as a coup, as a democratic process in the Western media is extraordinary. Look, even if the election of October of 2019 was under some suspect situation, Morales' term was not going to end till January, and he was railroaded out in November. That means they railroaded him out 2.5 months before the previous term for the previous election, which nobody contested. Before that term ended, why didn't they let him complete his term till January and then say he should go? No, even that liberal observers didn't say, oh, wait a minute, there's a problem here. Let him finish his term. No, quite acceptable to allow General Williams Kaliman, a military officer trained in the United States, to walk into Morales' office and say, get out of here. And everybody clapped and said it's democracy. I mean, that's the nature of the information war that we are facing. I just gave you a simple little example. These facts are not contestable. Morales' term ended in January. He was kicked out in November. His term ended in January for the election that was the prior election, not the October 2019. Nobody contested the prior election. These are uncontestable facts. Nobody will contest it. You put the facts together and they scratch their heads and say, well, yeah, but he overstayed his welcome. So did Angela Merkel. She was the Chancellor of Germany longer than Evo Morales was the president of Bolivia. Nobody said Angela Merkel has overstayed her welcome, she should leave. It's incredible how the information war has basically demolished our ability to think rationally, to think sensitively about world affairs.
Excellent comparisons. Maria?
That's excellent, Vijay and Carlos. I really agree with everything that you've said. I'd just like to add something else. In Chile, the United States won and the people lost. But in Venezuela, the United States has lost and the people have won. And why has that happened? Well, the information war, as you have described it, Vijay, is exactly what you have said. But inside Venezuela and very much in the region, there have been two things that have supported Venezuela, and why everything they have thrown at Venezuela, which is so, like Carlos says, so sophisticated and so intense right now, have failed for two reasons, I believe. One is the people. It's no longer a mass of people in Venezuela. No, it's el pueblo organizado, as we say, which means the organized people. Everybody is a member of something, a commune, a communal council, a collective, these organizations of the neighborhoods where they are in, of all sorts. So the Venezuelan people, and I have to tell you, I'm telling you this as someone who only goes to Venezuela once a year, I have been astounded at the sophistication, at the education, at the concientización, the consciousness of I hate to say this to ordinary people, but the ordinary people on the streets of Venezuela, right? This is the first defense of Venezuela. Second defense is its military, because the military of Venezuela is very distinct from the military of Chile, which they have been brought up in the Prussian style. The Venezuelan military for many years would allow someone like Chavez, who was born in a house that had no floor, a shack, arrive at what he did, an officer. So we have a very different military. And of course, Chavez's nucleus for the revolution was from the military outward. So Venezuela has triumphed, and it didn't go down like Allende did, but has evolved with this revolution, the Bolivarian revolution. And I think that it is very important to remind people of this, because there is a bias in the North that they think, military bad, because they're only thinking of, say, fascist military like in Chile. The Venezuelan military is a revolutionary military, and the people in Venezuela are not a mass. They are an organized people with what Paulo Freire used to talk about, concientización. So that's why there were two coups, one in Chile and one in Venezuela, and the one in Venezuela has not taken hold. But the situation of the media that Vijay is talking about is very serious, because that entails the rest of the world. And the bias, the racism, the complete denigration of Venezuela and its people and its leaders has been atrocious. And this is, I don't even talk about Canadian media. There's no such thing as Canadian media. Do you know where we get news from here? We get from Reuters and everything that comes from the United States. There is no newspaper or major media in Canada that has a reporter, an actual person, in Venezuela or anywhere else. We get everything canned from the United States. So this is another thing about that Canadians have to watch out, that they are being fed canned news that comes straight from the empire, and therefore this is what they are thinking about. So thank you, Vijay, for saying that, and thank you, Carlos. Sorry, I interrupted.
Thank you so much, Maria, for illuminating our audience. So we have quite a few questions, so I'm just going to ask that that we try and get through, that we try and just be a little bit more brief so that we can get through a number of them. The next question we have is from Judy, and this is to any of the panelists. There are left-wing governments in other countries, like Chile, for example, comes up again. Why is Canadian policy towards Venezuela so much worse than towards those other countries? So we'll start, maybe this time we'll start with Vijay.
It's important to go back actually again to 1998, or rather to the 1990s. After the fall of the various military juntas, in the Southern Cone and including up in Brazil, you had this new consensus emerge, the neoliberal consensus, where in Chile, the example given, the Concertación basically ran things with the presumption that nothing really needs to change. We can still maintain the constitution of the dictatorship. Let's just go forward and try to improve the condition of people's lives and set up human rights institutions and so on. But nothing really needs to change. Then you got in 98 quite an amazing development, which was Chavez winning that election. Now, Chavez brought together in a political project two flanks of the left that had begun to fundamentally distrust each other. One was the flank of the more conventional orthodox left, the communists, people who believed in taking state power and so on. And the other side were people who had been inspired by the kind of Zapatista, autonomous kind of left, also inspired by developments taking place in other parts of the world, alter globalization and so on. These two tendencies were brought together by Chavez in 98. And then the Bolivarians decided not enough to do this in Venezuela. Let's take it to the whole hemisphere, not just the continent, South America, not just Latin America, into the Caribbean. Let's take this to New York, to the Bronx, to Boston. Let's start delivering, cheap gas there. Let's show people what Bolivarianism is in New York City. They had a very aggressive approach to saying we have an alternative to this mind-numbing, destructive capitalism coming from Washington. That's the project that had to be destroyed. This is not about a left government, It's not about Gabriel Boric coming into power and saying, well, I'm going to change some things, we'll, reform the pensions and something. Gabriel doesn't have an agenda for the hemisphere, Even when the Kirchners came to power, they didn't say we have an agenda for the hemisphere. I mean, it took Hugo Chavez. Listen, those who were around at that time, remember this. Chavez just shows up at Punta del Este, at the free trade areas of and he just says, Yankees, we're not listening to you anymore. We're building our own thing here, not just in Venezuela, the whole region. That's why there's such deep hatred for the Bolivarian project. Plus, there's a class hatred. Face it, guys. Nicolas Maduro was a bus driver. He's a trade unionist. He's a working class guy. He's not one of your university leftists that, you all shake hands and there's a sort of, there's a kind of cultural similarity. Nicolas is not this kind of hipster leftist. He's a working class guy. There are not many working class people who are heads of governments in the world these days. Okay, most of them are bankers. Most of them come from some elite background. Justin Trudeau inherited his position. I mean, these are the kinds of sociology of power nowadays. Maduro is different from that. Evo Morales was different from that. Evo Morales was a coca farmer, trade union leader. They come from the soil. They are not people who got their degrees, went and worked in the World Bank and so on. The hatred of Venezuela is hatred for the Bolivarian project, which is hemispheric, and hatred for the class that is then in power, because this class is not people you can, sort of say, look, I'll get your kids into Harvard and we can make a deal and so on. These people are not interested, they're simply not interested in coming to Camp David and, drinking a beer for a beer summit with Obama. They're not interested. They have a whole different framework. And I think we should take that seriously.
Thank you, Vijay. Do any of our other panelists want to chime in? All right, I'm going to move on to the next question. So the next question is from Pedro. What is the history and objective / workings of the Lima Group? And I'll put this to any of the panelists. Or perhaps I should direct, as I did earlier.
Could you repeat that, please?
The question from Pedro is, what is the history? I mean, people have talked about this already, but maybe perhaps if there's any elaboration that anyone wants to give around the history and objective / workings of the Lima Group. Is there anything new that our audience might not know about, how this group came about and what its mandate is, really?
Well, go ahead, Carlos.
Oh, go ahead, Maria. You
All right,
were on the roll there.
We'll start with you, Maria, and then Carlos. Yeah.
Well, I think all of us have sort of covered a bit of this. First of all, as Vijay said, Canada was doing the bully's task. The United States wanted Canada to be the front man to this, because as he said, it looked bad for them to do it. So they asked Canada, you go do our dirty work here. And then what does Canada do? Say, okay, I'm going to get the most thuggish, governments in the region to do our dirty work for us. And so they got all of these thuggish, right-wing, extremist, undemocratic countries and called them the Lima Group, as if they were some sort of democracy judges or whatever. What was the purpose? One purpose. The purpose was to defame and overthrow the government of Venezuela. That was what they were. There was no other objective. There was nothing else. This was what they wanted to do, to defame, to tell the region and the world how horrible Venezuela was and its government and its president and everything, and he must go. That Maduro had to go, and they were going to have a regime change and put heavy nose, whatever puppet they wanted as president of Venezuela. Well, why did they do that? Because even the Organization of American States, which is, has been always been doing whatever the United States wanted, even the Organization of American States would not do this. And so they came with this idea of jumping over the Organization of American States and created this ad hoc nothing group that doesn't have any kind of authority, any kind of any legal standing or whatever, to do something totally illegal, going against every principle of international law. It is a disgrace. It is one of the most disgraceful things that the government of Canada has done internationally. And quite frankly, they should be ashamed of themselves. And I would love to see them say, we're going to stop the group of Lima, but you know what? They're not going to do that. They're going to be quiet and just let it go from people's consciousness. But it is a Canadian disgrace.
Thank you, Maria. I just want to take a moment to remind people to send that letter to Melanie Joly, calling for normalization of relations with Venezuela, and to end this. Carlos.
Yeah, just wanted to compliment a bit with Maria. It is precisely that what she's saying is it's a fabrication that was set up because there was enough support in the OAS to rally against Venezuela, so they created this illusion. And this is important because again, like Vijay was saying about the media and how these messages are being reproduced now. You have these elements that create this false narrative. So now you have this Lima Group as if this was something. I mean, if a person hears the word Lima Group for the first time, they'll probably think it's something that is real, established, it has a history, and it's not. It's a complete fabrication. But it gives the idea that there is some multilateral support. There's a regional support to challenge Venezuela. Venezuelan democracy and everything that has to do with Venezuela. But this type of fabrication gets repeated over and over. And when we had an attempted coup here in 2019, where Guaido was actually involved in this, he was and Leopoldo Lopez was taken out of jail and been put out in the street, and they were waiting for some military support that never actually came. You had Freeland the next day, send a video saying something like Venezuelans are in the streets and we're supporting the Venezuelans in the street, and we're asking for a return to democracy. Again, fabrications. Nobody came out to the streets on that day. No military backed up the coup. I mean, it was actually very lame. It was very. I mean, it was something that in 2 hours it was done. You know, these people have no. They called for support of the streets and it didn't happen. But you had this fabrication in the narratives, and you have very high officials. You know, like somebody like Christian Freeland, you have some, you know, and anybody, take any of the spokespersons from the State Department or from the National Security Council, and they'll come out and you know, with an open face and say all these things as if they're true. Oh, the Lima Group, the number of countries of the region are rising against Venezuela or are demanding Maduro to step down, or the people, the masses of people in Venezuela. These fabrications is something that we must really be aware of and not get tricked into this, because you know, that's what it is. It's just propaganda to promote a specific stance.
Thank you, Carlos. The next question that we have, if there's anyone that can answer this, probably Carlos, is about the embassy in Ottawa. Is it controlled by the legitimate government or by the fake Gwydo government?
Different from our embassy that was stolen from us in Washington. We still have control of the embassy in Ottawa. However, again, you know, we hope that this is something that remains that way. I mean, most countries in the region. See, this is interesting too about these fake narratives, because every time you'll hear an official spokesperson from the U.S. or from Canada will say, "Oh, the over 60 countries that support Guaido, that recognize Guaido." When you look at the numbers now, you know, that number has decreased dramatically, and I'd be surprised if you have more than 10 or 12 countries actually recognizing Guaido right now. Right, Guaido right now is not even a member of the National Assembly. His term expired last year. So this is important. This is important to point out, because I think that, you know, the tendency throughout the world is, of course, to stop this farce. You know, a lot of people were tricked into this recognition because they were convinced that in 1 or 2 weeks, you know, the President Maduro's government was going to crumble and it will be over. So, and I think that's why a lot of people did this. Well, we've reestablished relations with Peru. We've just recently reestablished relations, of course, with Bolivia after the coup was after the new election and so forth. So I think it would be very dangerous if, you know, if there was an attempt to take control of our embassy in the same way that it was done in the United States. Actually, it would be very smart for the United States to give us back the embassy and try to start this conversation going again.
Thank you, Carlos. We have a question from Afua. How can Venezuela recoup its money that has been stolen by Western banks?
Well, I think it's very difficult in the sense that partly again, they use this farce to justify why, you know, the funds are not getting returned to Venezuela. We have, in many cases, many instances we have trials ongoing. For example, in the case of the gold in the UK, there's 31 tons of Venezuelan gold from our central bank's reserves that are there, and it's undergoing a legal process where apparently the authorities there are confused about, you know, who the real president is in Venezuela, so we can determine what to do. And meanwhile, they'll hold on to it. It doesn't answer to a legal. This is the problem. It doesn't really answer to a legal problem. This is not a legal confusion. Nobody can legally be confused of who is or who's not the president. This is a political issue. And it's only determined because it only exists because there's a political will to not give this money back to the Venezuelan people and to the rightful Venezuelan government. So as long as that political change doesn't take place, it's very difficult for us to get hold of, you know, this money that is stuck in these banks. It's, again, if it was legal, if it was fair, if it was clean, transparent, we would have already controlled the money again.
Thank you. The next question is from Joan. Joan wants to know if you could please discuss the role of Erwin Kotler's Human Rights Parliamentary Committee. I'm not sure if our international audience panelists are familiar with Erwin Kotler. The Human Rights Parliamentary Committee and his UN Watch Group in influencing Trudeau's government policy in Venezuela. Does anyone want to take a stab at this? Not Vijay.
I would just say that he's a very sinister person who has been always on the wrong side of everything that he has ever tried to defend. He's always going on about he's a lawyer of human rights. And of course, I don't think he would know human rights if it hit him over the head with a 2x4. And he is an avowed enemy of Venezuela. So everything that he and his committees have done are not worth the paper or whatever it is that they write on. That's all I want to say about that sinister individual.
Thank you, Maria. Okay, we have a question from Eva. How much of Canada's policy in Venezuela was a quid pro quo under Trump, with Trump under the new NAFTA deal?
These are all things about Canadian politics that really I wish I had the energy to follow, but I really don't take Canada that seriously, I'm afraid to say. So I'm sorry that I occasionally read the Mail and Guardian. Mail and Guardian? No, that's in South Africa.
Globe and Mail.
Globe and Mail, correct. Shows you how carefully I look at things. I'm afraid it's not such a significant country. I'm being pretty rude here, but you got to consider that I come from a country of 1.4 billion. I live just south of a country of 1.4.5 billion. That's China. The Financial Times recently mocked the attempt, the communication between China and Russia that have set aside a serious border conflict and serious, tension between those two countries to ease things up in Eurasia. Rather than saying that's a good thing, the Financial Times comes and sees something sinister there and says China and Russia are cooking something up to basically undermine the West. The West? What West? What West? Remember what Canada, the West, does in other parts of the world. So, I mean, I really follow other parts of the world much more than Canada. So I don't know, quid pro quo, that assumes that there are actually, those kind of differences of opinion at stake, that we'll do this for you if you do something here. In fact, I would like to say that I think here the tail and the dog might be reversed. I have a feeling Canada, or at least its mining companies, is driving a lot of this policy. It's not that Canada is carrying the bucket for the United States. We shouldn't be misled, It's like the question of Israel and the United States. Who's carrying whose bucket? I think analyzing that is very important. Canadian mining companies are wretched, and they really push an agenda in not only in Latin America, not only in places like Papua New Guinea, but on the African continent. Take a look at what Canadian mining companies have been doing in Burkina Faso. These are the gold companies. Take a look at that. It's really shameful. I've often wondered about the role of Canadian mining companies in the assassination of Thomas Sankara, but that's purely me wondering.
Thank you so much, Vijay. And it's important for us to remember that, as much as we're fighting to have an independent foreign policy, we have our own interests as Canada, and you really do not have to read the Globe and Mail. Really, it's okay. We're trying very hard to take ourselves seriously as Canada and do what we can with what power we do have. But thank you so much for those comments. I'm gonna take the next question is much broader, not just Canada. We have a question from Jean, who's asking, are Venezuelans following developments in Haiti, where the same imperialist gang that attacks Venezuela has just retired a Haitian Gwydo-like puppet? And then he goes on to comment, the Miami-based CTU company of mercenaries used in the killing of Jovenel Moïse is a property of a right-wing Venezuelan. So he's saying, you know, stooges of imperialism should take notice. Would anyone like to comment on Jean's question and comments?
Well, I would say, first of all, that Venezuelans do follow what happens in Haiti. Haiti has a very special place in the heart of Venezuelans because of all the nations in the world, of all the powerful nations in the world, when we were fighting for our independence, when Simone Bolivar was fighting the formidable Spanish Empire, it was small Haiti, the first Black republic of the world, who gave Simone Bolivar all kinds of help, money, food, even a printing press. So that was the only help that Venezuela ever got from another nation when it was fighting the empire. And Venezuelans have a long historical memory and do not forget that. The other thing is that Haiti is very close to us. And so there is this relationship with Haiti. I have to say that this brand of Canada that Vijay was talking about doesn't work quite in Haiti. The first place where I have ever seen demonstrations of irate people on the street protesting against the Canadian government has been in Haiti, because the Canada has been more vile, I think, to Haiti than the United States, overthrowing its government, getting its president out of the country, putting them in a plane and taking him to some country in Africa. I can't remember his name, and it has been outrageous Canadian. That's why I mentioned it when I was talking about how Canada has overthrown the government of Haiti and maintained it in this deplorable situation of penury, of complete poverty, because of the corporations, because all this, not only resources, but also work that they can get from these impoverished Haitian people who are our brothers and sisters. So I'm very, very much ashamed of that. I also want to say that, as I said in my comments, Canada is the mining headquarters of the world. Every large mining, conglomerate in the world has a headquarters here in Canada. And so, yes, it is the mining industry that has a straight road. They probably have their own little door to the parliament and government in Canada. And they are a very, very dangerous and strong lobby in Canada.
Thank you, Maria. Does anyone else want to take a stab at Jean's question and comment around Haiti? Carlos?
No, I would like just to second what Maria was saying. Definitely, we have a strong ties with Haiti, and we're very concerned about what we've seen that recently. We're also concerned. I mean, about what goes on. Concerned about the popular movements in Haiti and their attempts of changing or getting control basically of their own country in light of so much intervention. Probably the most intervened country in this region is by far Haiti in comparison to the rest of Latin America. And we also saw with the assassination of the president there, how the use of these Colombian mercenaries who went there and carried out this crime, signaling perhaps a very dangerous new moment in our regional history, because I don't think we had any previous knowledge or attempts of mercenaries from one country to the other and carrying out these type of aggressions. So I think it's something that we're watching closely, and of course we're very concerned, and we hope that Haiti can find its root and of course prevail of the circumstances.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We actually have so many more questions in the Q&A box, but I feel like, the night, let's just wrap up. I feel like we have learned so much tonight from our panelists. If you have any final words for our audience before we part ways, we'd love to hear a final word from each of our panelists.
Well, I'll go first. I just want to say that the letter that the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute has put out there demands everybody who was on this call to participate in it. Please campaign on that letter. It's not enough to sign it, but campaign on it. I hope you'll go to your various representatives in their rather quaintly called ridings and tell them that you're thinking about this a lot. You're thinking about the mischief of mining companies. You're thinking about what is happening in your name in countries like Burkina Faso, in countries like Papua New Guinea, in countries like Venezuela. It's not just the issue of Venezuela. I mean, you have to broaden this. So I very much urge people to campaign on the letter. There's no point having an institute such as Bianca runs, no point having an institute like that, no point creating letters like that, no point having webinars like this if we're all not going to campaign on them. 200, 300 people in a webinar, that's a great number of people to go and campaign. Let's make it millions of people who are outraged. Thanks a lot for tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Vijay.
Yes, because I want to speak first because I know Maria is gonna end up powerfully, so I wanna stand up on a wonderful note. So I want to thank you, Bianca, in particular, of course, and everyone who has led us this opportunity to speak on this issue. I think it's important. We don't get that many opportunities to talk to a Canadian audience and in general to lay out these issues. Again, I just want to really emphasize something though, that whatever differences we may have with the Canadian government and however distance we may have with them, this is by no means our feeling towards the people of Canada. I've met some very wonderful people from Canada in these years that I have been at this position, taking care of North America. I wish we have even more interactions than we do now. I think, I hope we can host more Canadian delegations to come. Hopefully, maybe there's something that our institutes can work together, Bianca, trying to get people to come here and experience, not just come here and see for yourselves, and with total freedom of looking at everything you want to see, but to see our reality in Venezuela and strengthen bonds between the popular movements and the popular organizations in Canada with the popular movements in Venezuela. Maria mentioned this before, there's so many things that we have in common, the struggle of our indigenous populations and all the richness of our history, our struggle also for confronting the perils of climate change, and so there's so many things that we can work together in, and I just want you to know very well and deep in your hearts that the Venezuelan people have an open hand and have an open heart for people of Canada, from all provinces of Canada, and we hope that we can strengthen our relationship, people to people diplomacy, which is what we really believe in. So thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Maria.
Well, I want to say something deep in my heart. Venezuela is the land of my parents and my ancestors. And Canada is the land of my children and my grandchildren. So there is nothing I want more in the world than to see peace and a respectful relationship between Canada and Venezuela. And indeed, I've been working towards this all the 40 plus years that I've lived here. And you know, one doesn't love a country because it's big, because it has so many millions in population, because it's important. It's because it's the place where you're living, you know, and the place that has your memories, and the place that has your friends and the people that are important to you. And I have to say, and I repeat again what I said before, if the Canadian people knew what this rubbish government that we have right now is doing to Venezuela, they would reject it. And it is true. The government we have right now is complete rubbish. It's more than that, but still. So I want to say that I think that there is hope that maybe we will have a change of government in Canada someday. I hope it isn't the Conservatives, because then it'll be even worse. But one can hope and one can pray. And I want to say that I feel so proud of the Presidente Obrero, the worker president, who is Nicolás Maduro, who has had to stand up to greater challenges than even Hugo Chavez had to do, and has come out with defending Venezuela and its people in a marvelous way. I have to say that I feel greatly proud of the Venezuelan people, who have shown tremendous courage in the face of this horrible adversity. And I hope that the people of the United States of America have better luck with their social processes and their governments, because their government is even worse than rubbish. So I live in hope. And again, I will continue working for the friendship between Canada and Venezuela, and especially between our indigenous peoples, because we haven't talked very much about that, but the indigenous peoples of Canada and the indigenous peoples in Venezuela have great deal in common. And I hope that we can establish a greater bridge and connection between them. So again, Bianca, thank you so much for organizing this. And again, I feel really honored to be on a panel with Carlos Ron and Vijay Prashad. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. Well, the honor is ours. I can't thank you enough to our panelists for such a lively, informative, and passionate discussion, for the call to decolonize our foreign policies, to return to diplomacy, which includes, in the case of Canada, normalizing relations with Venezuela. It's been amazing to see how many people also have attended tonight's panel. That's very, very encouraging. Just to note that this is being recorded and will be posted to YouTube and will be sent to all registrants. So don't worry if you missed even a word of it. You can rewatch. And thank you to the audience for your insightful questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. Please do consider taking the actions. Call on Trudeau, alongside all the politicians, artists, and activists who have done so, to stop recognizing Guaido, to end sanctions, to drop the Lima Group, and to reset relations with Venezuela. And the link for that action is in the chat. We have a couple of events coming up. On the 30th of January, we have renowned poets, George Eliot Clark and Gary Geddes, who are going to be reading their anti-war poems. The event is called Ink Not Blood. I put the link in the chat there. Please do join us. That event is open to the public. We're also co-hosting Noam Chomsky alongside the Canada-China Focus on Canada's growing conflict with China. So do not miss those two events. And again, if you like events like these, please do consider making a donation to the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute at foreignpolicy.ca/donate. And thanks again to all of the supporting groups. There is support for Venezuela in Canada, and let's connect with each other, and let's connect with our panelists, and continue this struggle against imperialism. So thank you to the supporting groups. It's been a great event. Thank you to our incredible panelists. Maria, Carlos, Vijay. Thank you all for being here. That's it for tonight. Stay well, everyone. Peace. Good night.